Jackson stepped into the restaurant like a ghost slipping through the seams of reality. No lights, no voices, just the distant rattle of wind clawing at the windows and the rhythmic slap of his soaked boots against the tiled floor. The rain outside wasn't just weather. It was a warning, the kind that kept decent people under blankets and behind locked doors. But Jackson wasn't here for comfort. He wasn't here to rest. He was here to catch a thief. The air inside should have been still, untouched since the closing shift hours ago. But something stopped him in his tracks. A scent. Not stale grease or last night's fryers, but something unmistakably fresh. Grilled beef. His breath caught. This wasn't a ghost of yesterday's dinner. This was happening now. Silently he crept forward, the scent thickening like fog as he neared the kitchen. Every step slowed with suspicion. And then he saw him. Eli. The night cook stood alone at the grill, his posture locked in quiet precision. Flames licked beneath the burgers he flipped like he was preparing for a rush-hour crowd. No customers, no tickets, just a dozen patties sizzling, fries bubbling, buns toasting. It was surreal, like walking into a dream that didn't belong to him. Jackson ducked behind the ice machine, his heart hammering against his ribs. His breath came in shallow bursts, the disbelief hitting him harder than the storm outside. What the hell was Eli doing? Cooking like the place was packed at 4 a.m? No voices, no clatter, just the steady hiss of meat and the whisper of a slow, mournful tune from a dusty old radio. Jackson narrowed his eyes. If Eli wasn't selling this food, who was he feeding? For the first time in a long while, Jackson felt something colder than the rain. Uncertainty. And fear. Not of danger, but of the unknown. Something was off. Deeply off. 15 years earlier, Jackson stood behind that same grill, hands blackened with grease and heart burning with purpose. Langford's Grill wasn't just a restaurant back then. It was his dream. Built from scratch with nothing but debt and belief. He knew every corner, every screw, every spice in the seasoning. And now he couldn't even remember the last time he touched a spatula. Corporate meetings replaced shifts, boardroom tables replaced countertops, and the numbers were starting to whisper something sinister. Profits dipping, supplies vanishing, inventory holes no one could explain. All signs pointed to the night shift, and every answer led back to one man. Dave Morrison, his regional manager. Slick words, same excuses, seasonal fluctuations, supply chain, staffing shortages. But there was always one name that sat like a thorn in every report. Eli Torres. The night cook no one really knew. He's strange, Dave had said. Keeps to himself, probably skimming. Jackson didn't want to believe it, but he didn't ignore it either. Something was bleeding his business dry. So he decided to go back, to vanish. A new identity, a fake resume, dyed hair, thrift store boots, Mike Lang, janitor. He wasn't there to inspire. He wasn't there to lead. He was there to catch a ghost. Eli didn't speak much. He didn't slack off either. He clocked in at 11:59 p.m. sharp, out at 6:01 a.m. like a machine. No greetings, no goodbyes. Just a nod to Janet, the shift manager, and then straight to the kitchen like he was slipping into another dimension. Janet, a seasoned staffer with nearly a decade at Langford's, had seen every type, drunks, dreamers, hotheads. But Eli unsettled her. Not because he was rude, because he was empty. He's like air, she once told Jackson. You feel him pass by, but you never really see him. Jackson started watching him, quietly, not obsessively, but enough. What he saw disturbed him. Eli wasn't just working. He was performing rituals, habits, compulsions. He washed his hands exactly 5 times before every shift. Not 4, not 6, 5, every time, the same order, the same speed. He double-knotted his apron so tightly it left red marks on his sides, and when the doors were locked, he'd always play the same song. Not an album, not a playlist. One song, low, haunting, the kind that feels like it belongs in funerals or distant dreams. Twice, Jackson caught Eli just standing at the freezer window, staring out into the parking lot. No cigarette, no phone, no movement, just standing. 10 minutes once, over an hour another, like he was waiting, not for something, but for someone. Jackson tried to dismiss it. PTSD, maybe. Old scars. But Eli kept doing it. Same time, same silence. And something in Jackson's gut turned over. He didn't believe in ghosts, but the idea that Eli wasn't truly alone in that kitchen began to gnaw at him. The motel Jackson stayed in wasn't much better than a holding cell. The mattress sagged under years of neglect. The air smelled like bleach and ashtrays. The ceiling fan ticked like a broken clock. Still, it wasn't the noise keeping Jackson awake. It was Eli, the way he moved, the strange grace of his hands, the deliberate rhythm of his work. Jackson had seen cooks, hundreds, but none like this. There was no rush, no hiding, no chaos. Whatever Eli was doing, it wasn't theft in the usual sense. It was careful, purposeful, sacred. Jackson rolled over, eyes wide. If he wasn't selling the food, then what was it for? He'd watched the security feeds all week. No strange visitors, no shady backdoor deals, no money changing hands. It didn't make sense. There was no benefit, no hustle. It felt less like crime and more like ritual, like Eli was feeding something that couldn't be seen. Jackson sat up in bed, the weight of the thought pressing on his chest. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about loss. It was about something buried, something Eli was protecting. He checked the time. 7:12 a.m. Eli would be asleep now. Alone, most likely, just like he was at work. Jackson leaned against the thin motel pillow and whispered to no one in particular, "Tomorrow night, I'm going back." But this time, he wouldn't just watch. He'd follow. Wherever that food went, whatever Eli was serving, it was time Jackson found out. No matter what it cost him. Because if this wasn't about theft, then Jackson feared it had to be something far more unsettling. Something layered in shadow, in history, in wounds too deep for numbers to explain. Or worse, it was something he wasn't emotionally equipped to understand. Not yet. There was a time, not long ago in spirit, if far in years, when Jackson could name a spice by scent before he even opened the jar. When the blistering pain of burnt knuckles, the sweat that soaked into his collar, the grease wedged under every nail, they weren't nuisances. They were proof. Proof he was alive. That he was building something. That he mattered. He remembered how the slap of a spatula on hot steel could make his chest thrum with pride. How the sound of a perfectly seared burger crackling on the grill used to feel like applause. Tiny, sizzling affirmations of a job done right. Back then, he didn't cook for money. He cooked for meaning. Every plate was a prayer, every shift a sermon. And his name? It wasn't just on the menu. It was in the air, in the oil, in every bite. But that was 15 years ago. Now he wore tailored suits that pinched his shoulders, memorized financial reports instead of recipes, and led from behind glass walls. He hadn't flipped a burger in over a decade, hadn't touched fire in just as long. Somewhere along the corporate climb, he stopped walking into his own kitchens, stopped shaking the hands that prepped his legacy, stopped learning the names of the people who kept his vision breathing, stopped noticing the burn marks on their arms, the ones that proved they were still fighting. So why now? Why sneak back undercover? Why the lies, the mop, the graveyard shift? He told himself it was about control, waste, profit margins. But deep down, Jackson knew better. It was Eli, that silent man whose presence felt more like a shadow than a coworker, a name that had floated through spreadsheets and whispers, never loud, never certain. The man no one knew, who somehow haunted Jackson's thoughts like a memory he never made. He didn't know why Eli got under his skin. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was the ritual, or maybe Maybe it was because Eli still cared. Maybe it was because Eli reminded Jackson of the man he used to be. The one who stayed late for the last plate, who knew every regular's name and their story. The one who believed food was never just food. Jackson looked down at his palms. Smooth. Software corporate. The hands of a man who forgot what it meant to serve. He arrived earlier this time. No mop in hand, no uniform, no pretense. Just a mic hidden beneath his shirt, its tiny wire taped to his chest. Insurance. Evidence. Or maybe, deep down, a confession waiting to happen. At 3:45, the kitchen stirred to life. A click, a hiss. The grill lit with a soft roar, and the fire danced like it had been waiting. Then came the meat, slapped onto steel with that unmistakable sare. Onions joined, foil crinkled, fries sizzled. Eli moved with practiced grace, like he wasn't just cooking, he was crafting. Every motion measured, reverent. He wasn't feeding customers, he was preparing something sacred. Jackson didn't move, couldn't. At 4:10, Eli opened the storage room and rolled out a cart, dented, heavy, stacked high with stainless steel trays. Steam rose through the lids, fogging the cold. This wasn't surplus, this was abundance. Food prepared with intention. Then came the jacket, the zipped collar. Eli pushed the cart to the back door and vanished into the mist without a second glance. Jackson followed. The alley yawned wide and dark, the rain now a soft whisper around them. The cart rattled over uneven concrete. Eli didn't slow. He didn't check behind him. He walked with the assurance of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Jackson stayed back, careful. 30 meters, maybe more, just close enough to hear the wheels, far enough to remain a ghost. He didn't know where they were going. But he knew now, Eli wasn't stealing. He was delivering. The city changed around them. Clean sidewalks gave way to cracked streets. Light posts blinked out one by one. They passed rusted fences and boarded windows until finally the cart stopped in front of a forgotten warehouse. And then shadows moved. At first, Jackson thought it was the rain playing tricks. But no. Figures emerged, slow, calm, familiar with this hour. No rush, no desperation. They stepped out from the edges of the forgotten, behind dumpsters, beneath tarps, inside hollowed doors. A woman with a patchwork coat and swollen eyes, an old man with one crutch and no leg, a young boy whose arms clutched a worn backpack like it held the last piece of his humanity. Even a dog, soaked, silent, curled at its owner's feet, eyes full of loyalty. Eli didn't flinch. He peeled the lids from the trays. Warmth poured into the night. And then, in a voice barely above the rain, he began to call names. "Sarah, that cough easing up?" She nodded, smiled, no teeth, but all warmth, as she took the wrapped burger like it was gold. "Tommy, got extra fries for Rex tonight." The old man laughed. The dog's tail thumped. "David Rodriguez couldn't make it?" The boy shook his head. "Fever's worse tonight." Without missing a beat, Eli packed an extra meal, tucked in lozenges, pulled a syrup bottle from his coat pocket. This wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was something older, deeper. This was care. Jackson stood frozen behind a fence, heart clenching so tight it felt like pain. These weren't strangers. These were Eli's people. He remembered their names, their conditions, their stories. And he fed them like they mattered. Because to him, they did. Each meal was perfect, wrapped, balanced, as if it came from a 5-star kitchen, not the back door of a diner. This was no theft. This was service in its purest form. And Jackson, who had come to unmask a liar, now stood face to face with his own reflection, realizing maybe the only person who hadn't been pretending was Eli. He had built an empire of restaurants, but forgotten the faces they were meant to serve. He had chased success and lost sight of the soul. And in that alley, amid steam and silence, it wasn't Eli who was exposed. It was him. And for the first time in years, Jackson didn't know who he was anymore. "Tell him to stay warm," Eli said softly, placing the extra meal into the young man's hands. "I've got those job forms printed, no rush." A man with a weather-beaten face and a missing leg approached next, his laugh more breath than sound. "Rex gets a double portion tonight." Eli nodded without hesitation, already scooping extra fries into a foil wrap. "He's been loyal," he said. "Loyalty deserves a full belly." At his feet, the dog wagged its tail, twice as if it understood every word. Then came a woman with milky, unseeing eyes. Her hand reached out, trembling like a leaf in winter. "You didn't forget me, did you?" she asked, voice scraping the air like wind across broken glass. Eli met her gaze gently. "I don't forget anyone." He handed her the warm meal and touched her wrist, lightly, reverently, like anchoring her to the present, to something real. From behind the crumbling brick wall, Jackson's throat closed. He turned away on instinct, face wet, not from rain, but from something he didn't yet know how to name. There were no sermons here, no declarations, just a man, night after night, showing up for those the world refused to see. No cameras, no accolades, only dignity passed from hand to hand through grease-stained foil and tired, grateful eyes. Jackson had spent his life building systems, efficiency, metrics, scale. But what he saw now, what Eli had created with nothing but a dented cart and a worn-out heart, was beyond branding. This was belonging with no price tag, compassion without compensation. He wiped his face roughly and kept watching. The food was nearly gone. Every portion received, not a crumb wasted, not a single wrapper left carelessly behind. Eli moved like a maitre d' at a sacred banquet, collecting trays with a calm grace learned through repetition and respect. Every napkin folded, every surface wiped clean. One foil packet lay untouched, a bite missing from the burger inside. Eli paused, eyes on it. Then, instead of throwing it away, he gently rewrapped it, placed it in a sealed container. Maybe for someone late, maybe for someone who hadn't found their way yet, but not discarded, not forgotten. Jackson stayed in the shadows, unable to look away. Then Eli did something unexpected. When everything was packed and cleaned, he stood tall, feet planted firm on the wet pavement. He raised his right hand in a sharp military salute. 3 seconds, precise. No audience, no applause, just reverence. The alley, with its cracked concrete and faded streetlight, could have been a battlefield or a cathedral. But for Eli, this farewell meant something. It was a ritual, a recognition. These weren't strangers to him. They were comrades in an invisible war, poverty, pain, the slow erasure of being unseen. Jackson's breath caught. He had stood at countless galas, ribbon cuttings, investor dinners, events where applause followed checks written for show. But he had never seen respect like this. Not performed, not staged, just a man offering honor to the forgotten. He suddenly felt overdressed, overpaid, unworthy. 15 years, hundreds of employees, dozens of locations. And yet, in this forgotten alley, under flickering light, a man with calloused hands had redefined what it meant to lead, with service, with memory, with presence. Jackson bowed his head. For the first time since his father handed him the keys to the kingdom, he wondered if he'd ever truly understood what leadership meant. Later that morning, Jackson sat stiffly in the motel's hard-backed chair. The hum of the vending machine outside was the only sound for miles. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. His laptop glowed harsh in the dim room as he pulled up the back-end inventory system of Langford's Grill, something he hadn't personally checked in over a year. That was Dave's job. Dave's excuses. But now every line item felt like a trail leading to something much larger. Ground beef, 847 patties missing in 6 months. Burger buns, 120 unaccounted for. Frozen fries, thousands gone. Coleslaw containers, fryer oil, napkins, trays. To someone else, it all might have looked like waste, negligence. But Jackson now saw precision. He had watched Eli's hands, seen the consistency of each portion, the deliberate repetition. The losses mirrored the meals. Almost exactly. He leaned back, running both hands down his face, then forward again. He wasn't stealing from me, he muttered. He was replacing what he used. A lump rose in his throat. All this time, while Jackson suspected theft, Eli had been quietly paying for the shortfall, out of his own pocket, on a night cook's wage, just to keep the mission alive, just to feed people who didn't appear in reports or board meetings. He thought he had come to expose a thief, but the spreadsheet was a mirror, and what it reflected was him. The kind of owner who never stopped to ask why a man might work overtime and still leave with less than he arrived with. Jackson closed the laptop gently, not out of anger, but because the evidence didn't scream. It whispered. And what it whispered was devastating. You misjudged the best man in your entire company. The phone buzzed at 7:03 a.m. Jackson didn't look at it for a moment. When he did, it was as expected. Dave Morrison. He answered, said nothing. Morning, Dave began, all clipped efficiency. Quick update on the inventory issue. It's worsening, especially on the night shift. Silence. I'm prepping the termination papers for Eli, Dave continued. Too many inconsistencies. Margins are bleeding. We need to make the cut before this becomes a trend. Jackson stared at the ceiling, watched a slow water stain blink above him like a tired eye. This isn't personal, Dave added. You said to streamline. I'm doing that. Eli's not a team player. We don't even know what he does back there. I've got 3 replacements lined up, clean records, flexible, no drama. A long pause. Jackson didn't speak because the words that rose up weren't professional. They were human. He pictured the dog's tail wagging, the woman's trembling hand, the steam rolling into the cold. We're cutting him. For what? To save a fraction on a spreadsheet? To protect men like Dave? He heard typing. Dave already drafting the HR email. Eli never asked for anything, never bragged. And now the system was moving to delete him like a typo. Finally, Jackson's voice broke through. Don't do anything yet. Dave paused. You sure? Jackson's tone sharpened. I said wait. Then he hung up. His hands trembled, not with doubt, but with clarity. Silence was no longer an option. The shift ended just before dawn, the sky still heavy with the last color of night. Jackson stood in the rear lot, his hands buried deep in his pockets, breath rising like smoke in the cold. He waited. Then Eli emerged, pushing the empty cart back inside. He locked the door, turned toward his car, and stopped. Jackson stepped forward. I saw the cart, he said, voice low, unwavering. I saw where you took it. Eli froze. His keys slipped from his hand and clattered on the ground. He bent to pick them up, but his fingers shook. He didn't speak, just looked up at Jackson like a man awaiting judgment. Finally, voice hoarse, he asked, You gonna report me? Jackson shook his head. I haven't decided. Eli straightened, his body taut. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. But this time, there were no walls between them. No roles, no uniforms. Just 2 men, standing beneath the bruised morning sky, exhausted and stripped of pretense. I never stole, Eli said quietly. And Jackson believed him, because he had seen what honor looked like in a man's hands. Jackson nodded. I know, he said quietly. I paid for most of it. Some you took. Yeah, Eli replied, eyes unwavering. But not for profit. Not for me. I know, Jackson echoed again. Eli looked down, then back up, eyes clear, sharp, wounded, but proud. So what now? You fire me anyway? For breaking protocol? For caring the wrong way? Jackson didn't answer. Not because he didn't have words, but because none of the prepared speeches, none of the polished corporate language he had rehearsed, could stand in the presence of this kind of truth. For the first time, He didn't want to be the one with the final word. He just wanted to understand the man in front of him. Eli stepped back a little, waiting, unsure. Jackson took a breath, not to lead, but to listen. Eli leaned against the trunk of his car, posture calm, voice steady, as if he were retelling something etched not in memory, but in the marrow of his bones. "My father served 3 tours," he began, the words slow and weighted. "Army infantry, the kind of soldier who never asked for help until he came home." Jackson said nothing. He didn't need to. "They called it PTSD," Eli continued. "But back then, nobody really knew what to do with it. He couldn't sleep, couldn't keep a job, couldn't handle fireworks or kids shouting in a grocery store." He looked out across the empty parking lot. "We bounced between shelters, and one day, he just stopped trying." Eli's jaw locked. "He died in a cot, at a halfway house. No ID, just a dog tag, half the name rubbed off. Took 3 days to notify me. I was 17. There was no tremor in his voice, no theatrics, just a hollow steadiness, the kind that only comes after years of bleeding out silently. I spent the next year sleeping behind laundromats, eating from trash bins. I thought about stealing food. Almost did. More than once." Jackson's eyes blurred. He didn't blink. "But then people, like the ones you saw last night, started seeing me, sharing blankets, sitting next to me without flinching. No judgment, just kindness. They reminded me I was still human." Eli exhaled. "I cook because it's what I know, but I serve because they served me first. They pulled me back from the edge." He paused, voice soft but full of purpose. "If I can do that for even one of them, I owe it." Jackson lowered his head. His throat closed. He didn't expect to feel this much. Eli hadn't asked for sympathy, but something deep in Jackson broke open anyway. "I'm not doing charity," Eli said, gaze unwavering. "I'm repaying a debt." Jackson leaned against the car beside him, his breath visible in the morning chill. "A debt," he repeated. Eli nodded once. "They saved me. Not with money, not with advice, just by showing up when everyone else looked away." Jackson frowned gently. "You're feeding a dozen people on minimum wage. That's not just survival. That's impossible." "They don't ask for anything," Eli said. "Not one of them begs, but they remember what it's like to be needed, and that's what society took from them. Not food, not shelter, but purpose." The words landed with quiet finality. Not dramatic, not shouted, just true. Jackson felt a tectonic shift inside his chest, like something buried was finally surfacing. All his life, he'd measured value in margins and projections, in data points and KPIs. But Eli? Eli was moving in a currency unmeasured by graphs. Loyalty, memory, respect. "They come," Eli said, "because I treat them like they still matter. Even when the food runs out, they know I won't." He didn't say it with pride. He said it like a vow, a code, a promise carried like weight every night. Jackson glanced down at his shoes, polished, pristine, meaningless. Every spreadsheet in his mind crumbled. Ratios, budgets, performance reports, all blurred by a single truth. Kindness isn't pity. It's recognition. Those meals weren't handouts. They were proof. You exist. You still matter. You are not forgotten. Back at headquarters, Jackson sat alone in his office. Glass walls, sleek furniture, leather chairs. It all felt sterile now, removed. He pulled up the branch performance report, scrolling through the data, but this time through Eli's eyes. The spikes in gas usage? Not inefficiency. Just Eli lighting the grill at 3:45 a.m., same time, every night. The missing napkins and trays? Not theft, but tools of dignity. The gap in vendor receipts. Eli paying out of pocket. Each number snapped into place like a puzzle flipped to its true side. But the real absence wasn't in meat or oil. It was in gratitude. No logs, no recognition, no thank yous, just suspicion, just flags, just silence. Jackson clenched his jaw. How many like Eli had slipped through the cracks of his system? How often had decency been labeled as disruption? How many times had his silence made him part of the problem? He stared at Eli's name in the HR termination queue. He didn't cross it out. He deleted it. Not because Eli needed saving, but because the system needed correcting. The phone buzzed. Dave again. Jackson let it ring, then picked up. "Look," Dave barked. "If you're not going to act, I will." Monday morning. Eli's out. Jackson didn't respond. "He's a risk," Dave went on. "Costing us money, creating patterns we can't justify. This kind of inconsistency spreads." Silence. "You said he's responsible for about $2,000 in losses?" Jackson asked finally. "Rounded up, yeah," Dave said. "Mostly meat, bread, oil." "All right," Jackson said, leaning forward. "I once spent $5,000 on a dinner, private rooftop, imported wine, hired a string quartet, just to impress a guy who never even called back." Dave went quiet. "I spent $5,000 trying to feed my ego," Jackson said. "And you want to fire a man for feeding the homeless with his own paycheck?" Another silence. "You're not looking at damage," Jackson said. "You're looking at integrity that doesn't fit your spreadsheet." Dave started to speak, but Jackson cut him off. "If this company has room for $600 steaks and influencer marketing fluff, it has room for Eli." This time Dave didn't argue. Something had shifted. Jackson wasn't defending a worker anymore. He was defending a standard. And for the first time, he knew which side of the line he wanted to be on. The office fell quiet again. Outside, the city hadn't yet woken. The air was still. Jackson stared at the clock on the wall. 3:47 a.m. The time Eli always lit the grill. The hour Jackson used to believe the world was asleep, but now knew was the moment purpose came alive. His gaze drifted to the photo of his father on the shelf. Pressed shirt, hard hat, a hand on Jackson's young shoulder. The man who built Langford's on discipline, on systems, on control. Jackson picked up the frame. The glass was cold. "You would have fired him," Jackson whispered. "But I won't." And then he turned the photo face down, not out of resentment, but to stop looking backward. Because legacy isn't about obedience. It's about knowing what part of it to break. Sunday night, the air crisp, the sky clear. Jackson stood in the back parking lot of his own restaurant. No suit for meetings, just one for memory. No briefcase, no clipboard. Only a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, and calloused hesitation in his hands. 3:45 a.m. He walked through the back door. No announcements, no titles. Just the hum of lights and footsteps on tile. Eli stood at the grill, spatula in hand. Back turned. He turned at the sound, froze. Two men stared at each other across stainless steel. Jackson gave a small nod. Then quietly, "You need an extra pair of hands flipping patties." Eli blinked, then nodded once, and without another word, they cooked. Side by side, not as boss and employee, but as men who finally understood what it means to serve. Eli didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. But something shifted, not in his body, but in his face. A soft uncoiling of years lived behind quiet armor. The guarded expression cracked, just slightly, and from beneath that stoic surface emerged something fragile. A smile. It was small, hesitant, and real. Not a grin. Not for show. The kind of smile that hadn't surfaced in months, maybe years. Like a muscle remembering how to move, or a soul remembering it could be seen. "No apron?" Eli asked. Jackson shrugged, wiping his palms on his jeans. "Didn't want to look like I knew what I was doing." They both laughed, brief, honest, a sound of air clearing between two lives too long sealed shut. Without a word, Eli handed him a spatula. No ceremony, no speech. Just two men, in a kitchen before dawn. One carrying the weight of the past, the other finally showing up to help shoulder it. For the first time, they weren't boss and employee. They were equals, because transformation rarely arrives with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in with rolled-up sleeves and a single, quiet question. Do you need a hand? The spatula felt strange in Jackson's grip, awkward, heavier than it should be. His collar was open, his forearms already slick with sweat. He flipped a patty too early. Splat. Grease hissed and popped, stinging his wrist. He flinched, muttered under his breath. Eli didn't smirk. He simply pointed with calm patience. Wait until the edge crisps. See that dark line forming? That's your signal. Jackson nodded, adjusted. Tried again. Second flip, go clockwise. Helps keep the center juicy, Eli added. He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. He was the knowledge now. Muscle memory forged by 1,000 shifts and 10,000 meals. Jackson listened, followed. No pride, no pushback. They moved side by side, him timing the fries, Eli prepping buns. Rhythm, not speed. Focus, not ego. Silence filled the space, but it wasn't empty. It was full of presence, full of purpose. How long have you been doing this? Jackson asked quietly, eyes fixed on the sizzle. Eli didn't look up. Long enough to know what people need before they ask. The words settled in Jackson's chest like a stone dropped in still water. He glanced at the wrapped meals piling up. Each one identical, perfectly folded. Not just food, but respect. A ritual, not a routine. It wasn't about how to flip a burger. It was about presence, about remembering, about showing someone through action. You matter, you're seen, you're not forgotten. And for the first time, Jackson didn't understand this through numbers. He felt it, in his sore wrists, the sting of oil, the heartbeat of time pushing toward 4 a.m. He wasn't watching Eli anymore. He was walking with him, and once you've stepped into another man's world, even for a shift, you never see him the same again. They rolled the cart out together, not trailing, not spying, shoulder to shoulder. The night was still, crisp, stars pressed low. The alley opened before them like a quiet stage, and waiting there as they had before were the same silent souls. No line, no chaos, just patience, just knowing. A woman stepped forward first, bundled in mismatched layers, hands shaking slightly. Jackson recognized her. Sarah. She stepped toward the cart but didn't reach for food. Instead, her hand brushed the lapel of his coat. Gentle, curious. She whispered, more to herself than to him, "Richard, you came back." Jackson's breath caught. He froze. Richard, his father's name. She smiled softly, blind to the shock rippling through his body. "You always wore coats like this," she said, fingers curling around the fabric. "Quiet, kind. I knew you'd come back." Eli glanced at him but said nothing, and Jackson didn't respond. He couldn't. The world around him blurred. The alley disappeared. And in its place stood a younger version of his father, maybe once standing here, maybe handing Sarah a warm meal when no one else would. Had his father walked these streets too? Had he given when no one was looking? Was this woman holding the echo of a legacy Jackson had buried too deep to find? Sarah stepped back, clutching her, meal still smiling. And Jackson remained frozen in place, unsure if he was stepping into Eli's world, or if Eli had led him back into his own forgotten story. Sarah cried, quietly, her tears tracing paths down worn cheeks. Jackson didn't speak, didn't move. He simply stood there, breath short, hands open, heart undone. Eli stepped forward and handed her the meal, like handing over a folded flag. No words, no rush, just reverence. Then Tommy rolled up, one leg strapped to a crutch, a grin wide across his face. "This is Rex," he said, pointing to the scruffy dog beside him. "He's been waiting for you, too. Don't let the lazy eye fool you. He remembers everything." Jackson laughed, genuine and unguarded. Rex wagged his tail. Once. Twice. then nestled against Tommy's side like a king returning to his throne of threadbare blankets. David came next, the young vet, jacket patched with duct tape. He didn't speak. He simply stepped forward and offered a salute. Perfect form. No hesitation. Jackson raised his hand halfway, then stopped. Instead, he stepped forward and embraced him. No words, no formality. Just connection, just truth. David froze, then melted into it, like a man who hadn't been held in years. No one clapped, no one spoke, but something shifted. This wasn't charity. This was witness. These weren't shadows in the margins. They were Sarah, Tommy, David, Rex. And for the first time in a long time, Jackson didn't wonder what redemption looked like. This was it. The kitchen smelled of heat and smoke. Around the prep station stood a dozen employees, some still in aprons, others dusted with flour, coffee in hand, eyes wide. Jackson stepped forward, still wearing his kitchen whites, wrinkled, greasy, sleeves pushed up. His hair held the scent of onions and fire. He looked older, but clearer. "I'm Jackson," he said, breath steady. "I'm the owner, and last night, I remembered how to cook." A silence, then murmurs, eyebrows raised, a ripple of curiosity. Eli stood at the back, hands in his pockets, watching, unsmiling, but not indifferent. "I thought I understood what this restaurant was," Jackson continued, "but I forgot what food can mean." He let that hang. "Starting tomorrow, every night shift will prepare one extra batch. Meals, not for profit, not for press, for the people outside, the ones we've driven past, ignored." One cook whispered, "For free." Jackson nodded. "Free for them, paid for by us." No applause, but something stirred. Not confusion, not resistance, pride. Quiet, slow, like fire catching kindling. They didn't know how it would work. They just knew it had to, because for the first time, they weren't just employees. They were part of something, a vow, not a policy, to serve, to remember, to witness. The phone rang. Jackson didn't need to check the caller. Dave. He picked up, calm. "What the hell are you doing?" Dave barked. "You're derailing everything. This isn't scalable. It's reckless, wasteful, emotion-driven nonsense." Jackson didn't flinch. "You think feeding people is reckless? I think running a restaurant like a shelter is a fast way to bankrupt it." Jackson glanced at a photo taped to the wall. Eli, standing next to the night schedule, grease on his collar. "We're not wasting anything," Jackson said. "We're investing. In souls, Dave, not slogans." Dave scoffed. "I knew you'd go soft. I'll take this to the board." Jackson leaned back, voice steady. "Perfect. I'll send the board photos of Sarah, of Tommy, of David, of Rex." He paused. "I'll send their names too, since you never bothered to learn a single one." Silence. "That's not part of our model," Dave finally said, weaker now. "No," Jackson replied. "It's the part we've been missing." Click. He hung up. And just like that, the old model crumbled. Because the system was him now, and the walls of profit would have to make room for grace. 1 month later, it rolled out. Langford's first food truck. No flash, no branding gimmicks, just soft earth tones, brushed silver trim, and a name etched on the side. Silent service. Not a campaign, a promise. On the side of the truck, just beneath the soft line logo, a quiet inscription had been added, etched so subtly it was almost invisible, unless you leaned in. Sarah, Tommy, David, Rex. Names that weren't meant to shout. They were meant to remember. The truck didn't boast. It invited. The smell of grilled onions and rosemary butter drifted through the morning air like a whispered promise. "You are welcome here." Inside, Eli stood at the grill. Same calm posture, same precise rhythm. But something was different. His shirt no longer read night cook or staff. It bore his name, simply, boldly, Eli. He didn't cook for volume anymore. He cooked for dignity. Every plate was intentional. Smaller portions, yes, but each one balanced, measured, not crafted for hunger alone, but for memory, for humanity. Sarah stood beside him now, not holding a tray, but cracking eggs like she'd done it all her life. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was staff. Tommy, head set snug over his ears, directed foot traffic with a kind of pride only those who had been invisible could truly wear. He greeted each person by name, by face, with the warmth of someone determined no one would ever feel forgotten again. David, once saluting, once guarded, was now in his second week of kitchen training. He'd stopped raising his hand in formality and started offering smiles instead. For the first time in years, he belonged. And Jackson, he didn't schedule walkthroughs, he didn't drop in, he just showed up. Once a week. No pattern, no camera crew. Sometimes he washed trays, sometimes he flipped burgers, sometimes he just stood off to the side and watched, not like a CEO inspecting results, but like a man witnessing resurrection. There were no headlines, no hashtags, but inside that humming stainless steel box on wheels, the system had finally bent toward warmth, toward worth. And those who once waited in the shadows now stood under sunlight, feeding the next soul in line. Outside, Sarah stood near the order window. Her hair was tucked beneath a knitted cap someone had handed her last winter. She clutched a styrofoam container with two hands, careful, reverent, like she was holding something sacred. The line moved slowly, but she never rushed. Each person got her eyes, her voice, her memory. She asked questions, not generic ones, personal ones, the kind that let you know you'd been seen. And then, in a lull between crowds, she turned to Jackson. Her voice was soft, but steady. "You know," she began, looking down at the warm container in her hands. "Back in the day, I used to hand out flyers." She smiled without humor. "Cold mornings, busy corners. People never made eye contact. I felt like I was made of glass." She looked up. "But now, I hand out breakfast. And every hand that takes one looks back at me." Her fingers brushed the logo stitched on her shirt, her name glinting in faded gold thread. It wasn't a uniform. It was belonging. "I don't need a paycheck," she said. "I just need a place to be, a reason to wake up and be seen." Jackson didn't reply. He didn't need to. He watched her walk back to the line, her gait slow but proud, like a priest carrying communion, like a woman once discarded, now refusing to forget. And it struck him, not like a drum, but like a bell deep in his chest. This wasn't a campaign. This wasn't philanthropy. It was a collective confession, a slow, sacred apology to the ones we'd left behind. In Sarah's voice, the system found its conscience. She wasn't serving food. She was passing on dignity. The segment that aired was under 2 minutes long. A few quiet clips on CNN, buried between louder headlines. But it hit like a storm. They called it the grill that serves gratitude. An old woman handing out meals with trembling fingers. A young man saluting before pouring coffee. A food truck parked beneath an overpass, its warmth visible even without the fire. Then came Eli's voice, clipped from a handheld interview, barely audible over traffic. "They don't ask for anything," he said. "They just want to feel needed." 12 words, not a slogan. But they became one. Within 48 hours, Langford's inbox overflowed. Not with complaints, with letters, hundreds, handwritten, folded like offerings. A woman in Arizona wrote, "My father was a vet. He died thinking he was forgotten. If you ever serve eggs in his name, please just say Cliff." A teenager from Milwaukee sent $5 in cash. "I don't have much, but this helped me believe again." A retired teacher mailed a handwritten recipe card. A nurse sent wool socks. A former addict offered to volunteer 3 nights a week. No pay, no thanks needed. Jackson read every letter. So did Eli. So did Sarah. So did David. They pinned some to the wall, not to boast. To remember, because this wasn't about food anymore. It was about witnessing the invisible, honoring the silent, and teaching the rest of the world how to do the same. Silent service wasn't a shift. It was a signal. A revolution without a megaphone, started not with rage, but with a plate. Late one night, long after the phone stopped ringing and the hallway lights dimmed, Jackson sat in his office. Stacks of papers surrounded him, leases, projections, staffing forecasts. But his eyes weren't on them. They were on an old cardboard box. It was scuffed, taped shut with faded duct tape. He pulled it closer, opened it slowly. Inside, an orange janitor's vest, still faintly scented with fryer oil and soap. A pair of cheap black sneakers, one still slightly damp. A fake name tag clipped to a gray polo shirt. The name, Mike Lang. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just sat there, silent, staring at the pieces that once made him invisible, but had shown him everything. He could have tossed them. Instead, he placed them, vest, shoes, tag, into a simple glass case, dustless, centered by the window. Not a trophy, a reminder. "This," he whispered, "reminds me. I used to be blind." Outside the window, the city breathed. Somewhere, the truck was serving. Sarah was smiling. Eli was cooking. David was listening. And Jackson, once a man who owned everything and understood nothing, sat quietly, not wearing the disguise anymore, but never letting go of what it gave him: clarity, humility, sight. He left the light on that night, not because he forgot, but because remembering had become his choice. And tonight, he chose to never forget. By title, Eli was now the community director. By nature, he was still Eli. His alarm still went off at 3:30 a.m. No assistant, no car service. He walked 3 blocks, alone, boots worn at the heel, laces tight. He unlocked the truck like it was sacred. He didn't have to anymore. He had a team now, 2 assistants, full-time prep, his own budget line. But Eli never let anyone flip the first burger, never let anyone else touch the radio dial, never let the griddle heat before his own hand tested the oil. Someone once asked him, "Why don't you sleep in now?" Eli smiled, kept moving. "They believed in me when I was no one," he said. "I won't leave, now that I've become someone." Not said with pride, said like gravity. For Eli, rising early wasn't work. It was a vow, a quiet act of remembering. He remembered the names, the faces, the nights he had nothing but a spatula and a need to give. Jackson watched him sometimes, from a distance. Saw how Eli greeted every volunteer at eye level. Never higher, never lower. No speeches, no ego. Just presence. Power didn't change him. Recognition didn't rewire him. He didn't climb the ladder. He anchored it. In a world obsessed with rising, Eli chose to stay close to the ground, because that's where the hungry still waited, and he served. Not because he had to, but because he remembered. The grill hissed. Butter met metal. Jackson stood beside him, sleeves rolled, apron tied. Matching pace, slower, clumsier, but present. The city outside still slept, but inside that tiny kitchen something ancient stirred. Eli moved without speaking. Jackson followed. As they flipped patties, the first soft streak of dawn touched the window. Jackson paused, let it stretch. His fingers tightened around the spatula. The warmth on his face wasn't just from the fire. "I remember," he said quietly. Eli didn't turn. Jackson scraped the grill. "My father, he used to call people production units. Said if someone slowed the line, you cut them loose." He looked down, and for the first time in his life, he meant to unlearn it. Not just in principle, but in practice, in fire, in foil, in faces, and in a world trying so hard to forget the ones left behind. Jackson had finally chosen to remember. Jackson whispered to the steam and sizzling eggs, "If you were still here, Dad, you'd have to relearn how to be human. Not bitter, not angry, just true." In that soft moment, over the hum of cooking, He felt release instead of resentment. He chose a different path, not rebellion, but redemption. Beside him, Eli passed a wrapped sandwich down the line. Sarah laughed behind him. Tommy barked instructions, and David waved at a sea of sleepy, grateful faces. This wasn't his father's empire anymore. But it was a legacy worth leaving. The rush had faded. Only a few regulars lingered, sipping coffee, talking softly. The sky overhead was a pale blue that made everything feel lighter. Cleaner in a way only dawn can make the world feel. Jackson leaned against the truck, drying his hands when he noticed a small scene unfolding nearby. A mother and her young son walking hand in hand. The boy, no more than 6, wore light-up sneakers and had curiosity in his eyes. He tugged on his mother's coat. "Mom," he said, pointing at the truck, "why doesn't that man sell the food?" The mother smiled, crouched, and explained gently, "He's not selling it, sweetheart. He's giving it away." Jackson watched, quiet, as the boy looked deeper. "No," he said slowly, shaking his head. "He's not just giving. He's sharing." Jackson froze. Eli stopped mid-motion behind the counter. The boy had spoken something neither man dared say aloud. It wasn't charity or service. It was sharing, a portion of humanity given side by side. In that word came belonging. No hierarchy, just presence. Jackson turned back, letting that quiet truth echo louder than any applause. A child had seen through titles and mission statements and landed at the essence in a single word. He wasn't watching a movement. He was watching hearts align through food. Later, in his office, Jackson composed the email, not with metrics or memos, but with a sentence slow and heavy with meaning. If one man can feed 12 people on a night shift wage, maybe an entire system can learn to feed its conscience. He attached a grainy security camera photo, Eli drying his hands by the sink, caught in profile and still genuine. Below, he typed just 3 names: Sarah Langdon, 67 Tommy Reed, 41 David Moreno, 24. No more, no labels, just names. The final line, "Come, one morning, any morning, no press, no title, just a skillet. Cook beside them, and remember what we forgot. He sent it not just to managers, not just to the board, but to everyone. From the new intern to Dave himself. No chain of command, just human reach forward." He didn't expect replies. He offered a door, left ajar, a quiet invitation to remember. But replies came, like raindrops softening concrete. The first, a former employee, fired years ago. "I used to hate you, but that clip about Eli made me want to come back. I don't want a paycheck, I just want to cook." The second, a stranger. "That breakfast at the truck made me call my father after 9 years, and he picked up." Another, a 16-year-old student. "Our assignment is to write about something that matters. Mine's called The Silent Server. I want to be one too." Jackson exhaled. Not broken, not relieved, but whole. This wasn't about burgers. It was about the butterfly effect. Quiet wings that shift wind across cities, pushing fathers to answer phones, teens to choose kindness. It was about the man who flipped burgers in the dark and made the world feel lighter without asking to be seen. Elsewhere, in that mobile kitchen, Sarah stood at the window line, apron pressed, name stitched in navy thread. Just Sarah. Enough. She used to stand at soup lines invisible to passers-by. Now she handed meals and greeted people by name. "Morning, hon. Take a number. Take your time. You're safe here." Someone once asked why she worked holidays too. She smiled. "I used to beg scraps off a garbage truck. Now I run the list." Added softly, "You'd be surprised how that straightens your spine." One night she wrote, "I remembered today what it feels like to be alive." Sent it with her trembling hand. Next morning someone, her daughter, slipped a small bouquet into her hands. No words, just presence. Sarah let her know that all that mattered was that she came. Tommy walked with a limp, not from the leg he lost, but from years of being unseen. Now the rhythm was different. With Rex, the dog, beside him, every limping step came with pride. He managed the stockroom like a command post, timers set to the second, supplies lined by order. Soldiers eat hot, or not at all. He'd growl with mock command, clipboard in hand. People listened because he'd earned it. Rex had a badge now too. Assistant floor? Supervisor. People stopped to pet him, draw his face in charcoal, hung it on the staff wall. Rex didn't wag, just stayed by Tommy's side, always watching, like a sentinel of dignity. One Friday before breakfast shift, Tommy placed a framed sepia photo on a shelf. A young man in uniform, his father. He stared, then whispered, "Today, Dad, you eat hot. Took 40 years, but you made it," and went back to the grill. No applause, just the smell of butter on toast, the hum of service, quiet redemption in motion. David, now training in Culinary Academy, stood before judges mid-finals. The place bustled with truffle spritz and culinary flair. He plated a single honest burger, warm bread, fresh lettuce, a smear of sauce made from memory. The judge raised an eyebrow. "This isn't elevated cuisine." David didn't flinch. He placed the napkin, folded like a tucked blanket, and said, "I once ate this burger when I hadn't eaten in 2 days. What I remember is the man's eyes didn't flick away. He saw me." He pointed to the napkin. "This is for someone who might not remember their worth being served. I'm not here to impress. I'm here to restore dignity." The judges turned quiet. Scored him perfect. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of his purpose. He wasn't just cooking. He was feeding the need to be seen. In Detroit, in a humble storefront at dawn, Jackson poured coffee. A volunteer, hands trembling, balanced a tray of eggs and toast. He leaned close and whispered, barely loud, they weren't homeless. Society just wandered away from them. The boy didn't fully get it, but something shifted. Not shame, but humility. Jackson didn't elaborate. Truth doesn't need explanation. It settles in quiet moments, when your eyes meet another's without flinching and you realize, maybe it was we who got lost. He kept pouring coffee. Let silence teach the rest. Before the city stirred, Eli was already awake. 3:30 a.m. Not because of alarms, but because promise. He arrived alone. No one telling him to. He cleaned every knob, every grate, until the kitchen gleamed. No one started before he finished, not out of fear, but reverence. When asked why he still did it, now a respected director, he answered quietly, "I don't come to work. I come to keep a promise." At day's end, when last plate was gone, he stood alone in the quiet kitchen, looked upward, toward nothing and everything, maybe speaking to a fallen soldier, or to himself as a boy who once had nothing but dreams. He never said it out loud, but when the sliver of morning light caught his profile, you could feel his thanks. And that's why he never missed a morning. Not for duty, not applause, but because once someone believed in him when no one else did. And now, he pays that belief forward, through clean stoves and warm hands and quiet mornings. Jackson sat by the window in his office. Morning light crept in, a half-finished letter folded gently in his hands. If you've listened this far, maybe the world has disappointed you too. Maybe you've doubted it like I did. But I saw something, with my own hands, not just my eyes. I saw a man stand in the rain, not to protest, not to beg, but to make sure no one went hungry. Because of him, I finally understood what it means to be full. He folded it slower, with care. "If you still believe, please don't turn away." And he watched the sun rise, knowing some meals feed bodies, some feed the soul.